Today we're going to talk about a pretty serious and frightening circumstance, something that I went through myself and a few years back. And I have with me Mr. Ken Good, who was an attorney for over 25 years and worked in various legal areas. And Ken has handled cases including medical liability and a lot of other things. But he got involved in bail bond matters, and that's made him a go-to problem solver for attorneys facing significant challenges. And for myself and for my core audience, I'd like to focus on domestic violence and how zero bail policies affect those domestic violence cases. But before we dive in, let me greet and meet Mr. Good. Say hello, Ken.
Hello, Ken. Hi. How are you doing?
I have a younger audience. I don't know if they remember the George Burns thing. Yeah.
Mm,
Say goodnight, Gracie. And she'd say, goodnight, Gracie.
when I passed the bar exam, I went and took a trip, and one of the books I took with me was George Burns's autobiography, and talked about how he loved Gracie Allen so much. It was a very good book. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I'll read it when I have time. But no, I love to. So, as I said, I have myself experienced in the past domestic abuse and violence. And right now, in a lot of states, they have this zero bail policy on a lot of things, like, shoplifting and things that people are just getting away with it looks like. But unfortunately, they're also doing it with domestic violence cases. So tell us a little bit about how that works, that zero bail. What is that?
Well, bail is um, regulated by the states. And so we have a state system, and each has its own, and each regulates it differently. And so when we talk about zero bail, we're talking about California, and we're talking about how they're regulating bail. New York does something similar, but it's called released on no bail, or
Mhm.
Texas calls it released on a personal bond. So these are all different kinds of ways that we release people that I call simple release, where you don't pay anything, you're just making a promise to come back. And so, domestic violence is one of those cases that in a lot of states is a misdemeanor, and we're concentrating on misdemeanors to become these simple release policies. And think of a simple release mechanism is a pinky promise. You're pinky promising that you're going to come back. And, the whole purpose of bail is to give assurance to the court that you're going to return to answer the charges. It doesn't have anything to do with the presumption of innocence. It doesn't have anything to do with your criminal charges other than what assurances are you giving the court that you're going to return. And what we're finding with these simple release mechanisms, they don't mean anything. I mean, you get a 80% failure to appear rate, and 80% of the cases they don't come back or they miss their next court appearance. And you think that's too big of a number. That's got to be crazy. That can't be true.
Believe you. I believe it. And the thing of it is, my abuse was in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. And we didn't have anything there was no way I had a number to call. I didn't know anything about a safe house if they even had them back then. And I filed restraining orders, which got ignored. And I would like you, I know this stuff still goes on today because now they have this. Oh, just go and promise not to hit her again. Okay.
Yeah.
So could you tell us, and this is a good example about I think it was Harris County, Alex Guiardo.
Guajardo. Mm-hmm.
Yes, tell our viewers about that one.
Well, Caitlin Guajardo was married to a guy named Alex, and he was kind of a rough guy, and they were married, and he was arrested, and he was for something completely different, but he was arrested and he was released on a personal bond, so simple release. But then he got arrested again for domestic violence. So he
Mhm.
was already out on bond.
Yeah.
and he had violated the conditions of his bond by committing a new offense and got arrested for domestic violence for something he did to Caitlin. And what do you know? He got another personal bond. He got another simple release. And within hours of getting released, he went home and killed Caitlin. And the problem, what's the so shocking point was that she was pregnant. And he stabbed her 30 something times in her midsection, in her stomach, because he said that he did not want another man to raise his child. And so not only was he was vindictive that he didn't want anybody else to have anything to do with raising his child after he did all this damage to his wife. And, there's been a lot of outcry as a result of cases like that. And that one is the best example. There was a bill filed at the Texas legislature called Caitlin's Bill, Caitlin's Law, and it was incorporated into a bigger bill to address some of these terrible situations. And so we've made some violent offenses no longer eligible for personal bonds in Texas to try to keep these things from reoccurring.
Like I said, I was back in a different decade and we had nothing, but they had told this man to leave me alone. He was a big man. My second husband was a bouncer, so I'll tell you how. And he didn't start abusing me until I divorced him. And I bring that up because it's that mindset. If I can't have her, nobody else can. And at one point, I had called the police. He had just been at my apartment. And they said, we can't do anything. He's not here now. Didn't matter if I had bruises. So I was crying. And this officer, this is probably 1977, said, here's what you got to do. Go buy a gun. If he comes back, shoot him. And make sure he's inside the house when you shoot him. If you shoot him outside, drag him in. I thought, really? This is what you're going to tell me? So I would think, not knowing what you're telling us now, that things were better. But with these zero bail policies, how do we ensure that the survivor is safe?
We don't right now. We don't. Back when you were, when you were going through your, endeavor, there wasn't a lot of faith in the criminal justice system. You could get a protective order, but if they violated it, they wouldn't do anything with them, or they would have to violate it before they could do anything. And, we still kind of have that as the gold standard now. When you file a domestic violence case, they enter a protective order. But, with these simple release mechanisms, your thought about going to the police, your thought about filing a criminal charge has to be your second thought. Your first thought has to be your escape, your plan for how to start over, your plan for your protection, and what is your system that's going to give you support? What's your support mechanism going to be? Family or friends? You have to get all that set up now before you can even think about, am I going to go to law enforcement? Because you cannot go to them first. Because you got a clock ticking as soon as they kick them, because they're going to release them really quick.
I'm going to tell you, here's the problem. That it was the problem then, and it's still the problem. These types of abusive men, which I think they have a narcissistic complex that, there's something mentally wrong with them, of course. But in the beginning, you don't realize they're like that. Like both my first two husbands, were seductive and charming and seem like wonderful people. And then you get into the relationship, and when the abuse starts, you don't recognize it at first. You think, oh, he's in a bad mood. He had a bad day at work, or, I pissed him off somehow, whatever. So then once you realize what you said, that you need to leave, okay, maybe he hits you more than once, or whatever it is, you're enough. And like I said, I didn't have anything in those days. So to make a plan, I moved a few cities away, but not far enough. And he came down there. I thought, well, he's not going to drive all the way to Harrisburg. I'm from Scranton, Pennsylvania. But when he found out I was in Harrisburg, he did. And, it was very hard. Now, today, there are women's shelters. So when you talk about making the plan, first of all, the woman has to want to leave, and it sounds sick. But that sometimes the woman doesn't want to leave it. She denies it. She minimizes it.
Yes,
Just-
I think that's
just-
absolutely true. And,
Yes.
I mean, as a father of two daughters, I've always taught them about the way we treat women and the way women should be treated. But that's really true about the way anybody should treat another human being. I mean, I've been mad at my daughters. I've been mad at my wife. I've never once thought about hitting them.
Right.
And I mean, never once.
No,
And when you get to the point where that's okay, then the other person needs to say that's
yeah.
not okay.
I think too, a lot of these abusers seem to have in common that the way they were raised was not good. They probably were raised in an abusive home. I was alcoholic father. And then when they get older, sometimes drugs get involved or they get involved with the wrong people. But do you think there's some outside influences that make these men into abusers? Does it have to do with wanting control of any kind, maybe? I know that's,
Okay, so life is
yeah,
this journey, and sometimes the journey is not made for the weak of heart. And a lot of this, I think, is built into disappointment, and they're not where they plan to be. I mean, I have a sister who had a breakdown, or she had um, a crisis when she turned 25 because she would turn 25. I mean, most people, they don't have those types of crises till they turn 50 or 60, but she had one when she turned 25. But it was because she wasn't where she wanted to be at that age. And so
yeah,
I think a lot of that is but now when you add drugs into it and you add mental conditions into it, I mean, I think the thing that we have that's really lacking is, I mean, you could call it a moral compass, you could call it religious teachings, but when you have that overlay onto a situation, then we stand up for ourselves. We're a temple. We're God's temple, and I'm not going to treat myself like that. I'm not going to let you treat myself like that. But it's hard sometimes when, you realize, I mean, look, my mom had 4 kids in 2 years and 5 months. And I think there was many times that she would have left my dad because they had a rough patch because they had 4 kids in 2 years and 5 months. But every time, she would like, would I be better off with for
yeah,
a single parent of 4 kids that were born in 2 years and 5 months?
right.
And she decided, no, she would not have been better off.
And
And
that
so,
was a different time too, where divorce wasn't a thing.
yes.
My mother, I remember as a teenager, I begged her many, many times to leave my father, and she would not. There were 4 children, and
But look at statistics. Even today, they say a single parent home has such a huge greater chance of living in poverty. And so, you have people that think things like, well, it's look at what I'm doing to my kids.
well, that's what happened. And with the first time I didn't have children, but I said I have to love myself before I can love
Hmm.
anybody else, and I
Yeah.
left. The second time I did have 2 children, so I had stayed with him about 7 years because I had his 2 children. But then I said, um, I'm a very smart person. I wanted to go to college. My circumstances, my parents, different things blocked me from that. And I went to a counselor. I wanted to go to marriage counseling. He wouldn't go. So I went
Hmm.
along. And
Sure.
he said, listen, I know you're a Catholic social services because that was free counseling. He said, but I'm going to tell you what, you get a divorce and go to college because this guy, he's either going to kill you or just, sand you down till there's nothing left. And I did. And I raised 2 children with no child support and went to
Wow.
college for 2 years before he came and started abusing again. So I totally understand that. You're a single mother, and usually these guys that are abusive are also deadbeats.
Mm.
You know, So it's a catch-22 for some women.
You know, the first house I owned, there was a house next to me that there was a young couple that rented, and they were
Mhm,
married and had 2 kids.
mhm.
During the time they lived there, the wife had a car accident, she hurt her back, and so she started taking painkillers and got addicted to painkillers and could not get away from
Yeah.
those painkillers. And so eventually the husband filed for divorce and he got custody of the 2 kids. And so that's one of the things I point to. There are things that are beyond your control
Mhm.
in life, but you have to know what are the parameters of what you're willing to put up with and what you're not. And you have to say, I mean, I think that's one of the things I like about my wife and I. We're both very religious. And so I think that's held us together, but it's also, we've been accountable for each other, or been accountable, held each other to be accountable.
Yeah.
And so we'll do that with our kids. That's not the way you talk to your
Yeah.
dad. That's
No,
not the way you talk to your mom, but you do that in life
exactly.
too. Well, I know you're having a tough time right now, but
Yeah.
you're going to be better. Things will get better. And I think that foundation helps in any situation. Even if you end up in a situation where something happens and life takes one of you down a different path, then you can see it and you can go, this is not going where I want to be. And we
Mhm.
need to change, or we need to talk about what we're going to do.
Right. And then the thing of it is, I wrote my first book called Raised by Wolves, Trapped by Demons. And the wolves were my parents because they wanted their children to support them when they get older. They didn't
Mm,
want
mm,
to go to
mm.
college or do anything. And the only way out was to get married. And so the demons in the title were the men. So the first 40 years of my life,
Mhm.
I was sort of like in prison and always trying to escape. It's quite tiring, if nothing else. And then I was blessed. My third husband, we are together 37 years. So it was nothing wrong with me. It was them. We're together 37 years. However, I went down that road with painkillers too in a car accident.
Mhm.
And we owned a bar. And it says very plainly, do not take with alcohol when they give you pain meds.
Mhm.
And I thought they don't mean me. And I ended up, and I have to give myself credit or God credit, but outside of myself, because one day I just said, God, please help me. I can't do this anymore. I was so depressed, so depressed. I put myself into treatment. There was no
Mhm.
intervention. It was, I need help. And from that day, now I have 34 years of sobriety, which comes along spiritual faith. You have to have that too. I found a community here when I moved to Florida, and it's a New Age principle type church, but it just fills me with joy. Okay. And their principles are things that everybody should live by. And they're probably just like you have your faith, you know,
Well,
basic.
what's the sense of community these days? I mean, when I was
Yes.
growing up, when you were growing up, the sense of community was really in our houses of faith. And, they
Yeah,
had all
I
these
agree.
activities, and
Mhm.
you interacted with your community through your church. And what
Yes.
is the social network that we have today? Because it looks like to me it's all online. We
Churches
don't
are dying.
interact with each other, and through that opaque blind, we say the most hurtful and harmful things to each other.
Yeah. The churches are not doing well. A lot of them are closing down. A lot of them are because of what's going on. And in our community, our church community has dwindled because of 2020, because we had it
Mhm,
completely shut
mhm.
down, starting to build up. But our principles are really easy. They're all about love and being kind to each other. There's no
But
big,
isn't that the key? Like you've said already, you've got to love yourself before you
yeah,
got to figure out how to love yourself before you can love someone else. And if you hate yourself, it's so much easier to hurt and
right.
hate the person you're with. And then it can be their fault that they're the reason why they are like they are. And so then they get it in their head, all these different things that if
Yeah.
they were just had the right mindset. But, having being depressed is not the King's X for criminal charges. That just means you've got a problem you need to work on, and you've got bigger problems if you act on this depression.
Yeah. And I went through depression after I got sober, but I took care of that too by getting help.
We've
And
all
that's,
been through that. We've all been through periods of depression. I have my youngest daughter is a special needs daughter. And, after she was born and she was 5 years old, we had a bone marrow transplant for her. And so she had low platelets. And, currently, that was when she was 5. Now she's just finished her freshman year in college and she's doing well. Platelets are normal. But I'm telling you, I had to go to counseling to get ready to go through the bone marrow transplant. And it was a terrible, terrible ordeal, but it would be an ordeal that anyone would have trouble going through. And you know what I had the most trouble dealing with during that is my our couple friends that would tell my wife, and she would mention to me that they would say, "Oh, you're so lucky to be married to Ken because he can get through this. He can handle this." And I was like, "What makes me more special? What makes me different than the normal person? I have the same problems. I mean, you have to mourn the child that you have when it's a special needs child, or mourn the child you thought you were going to have so that you can prepare for the joy of your special needs child." And I can't imagine our life without Laurel today, but
yeah.
I don't know. I don't feel I'm special. I mean, I had
Yeah.
difficult times getting through that ordeal just like any normal person would.
That's life. You're going to have a journey. You don't know what's going to come down the road, but you have to face it and you have to have faith that you can get through it. And when I finally got together with my wonderful husband, I had, I'd say, let's see, we're together 37. I probably had 25 almost perfect years. And then he got diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
Mm.
So he's now in stage 3. So I could, like you said, make it all about me and be bitter and resentful and ticked off that now I have to do more than I used to take care of him and everything. But I don't. And I have a support system and I have my church family and they call me and they sometimes bring me food, make dinner. They help me.
Well,
And
family,
yeah.
extended family's tough. I mean, that's one of those areas that you just don't. How do you have 4 kids grow up in the same house and turn out so differently?
Oh, I
I
know.
mean, I have twin sisters who are 11 months younger than me, and one of them had a car accident, got just so on prescription medications, and at
Mhm.
the end of her life, because she's already passed away, but at the end of her life, I had her declared incompetent, and I was her guardian, and she lived in an assisted living facility to manage her medications. But those last 3 or 4 or 5 years was probably the best years she'd had in who knows how long, and she was kinda like the cruise director of the, assisted living place, working
That's
with the
good.
new people that they came in,
Well, then
and
she found
everybody
a
knew her, and
purpose. Yeah.
but I'm just telling you that, we had many, many years where wouldn't have anything to do with each other because I couldn't handle her situation.
Yeah.
But in the end, no one else would help, and so I ended up being the one to come back and take care of her for those last few years, and it just and I would like to say that that caused my situation with my other extended family members, including her daughters, to get better, but it didn't. It didn't get better. And we probably won't have anything to do with them, or I probably won't have anything to do with them for the rest of my life. But you still have to be who you are, and you have to figure out who that is. And like if you love yourself,
Yeah.
then you might be able to get to the point where you were able to provide some type of care for your prior husband who has
One of,
extended Parkinson's.
oh,
But
my
the
present
yeah,
husband.
but the problem that we have is you throw in these situations and then go into the legal system, and then you have these simple release mechanisms where people are arrested and they're released while they're still mad. And they're coming home still mad, and they're deciding to ignore a preliminary injunction. And you know what? Sometimes you can be the punching bag in that situation before they can calm down. And that's what
Exactly.
happens. That's what we've got to change. And when you add on top of that, okay, something happens to you. So okay, what are they going to do? They're going to dismiss the domestic violence case and then file a murder case. Well, that didn't make it better. That makes it worse.
Right, because the other thing that seems like nothing can turn into a murder case, which it has. So let me ask you, there's a lot of advocates and a lot more resources for women today. And I want to talk about the Violence Against Women Act, because that has played a crucial role. Am I right about that? Can you tell our listeners what that is? The
Well,
violence.
the issue I have with with these types of acts, I'm kind of concerned that they become window dressing, because
Oh,
if we're overlaying on top of them these simple release mechanisms, how much help are we getting? I
yeah.
mean, if it's just going to be, we're going to release you as soon as you're arrested, or what if I mean, the worst thing we could do is issue a citation and before we leave the apartment and say, okay, you don't need to be around each other, but here's your ticket to show up for this charge. That's that's worse. And these types of release mechanisms have high failure to appear rates. And probably the biggest point I would make is domestic violence cases already have like a 50% dismissal rate. Now,
Oh, I,
do you think
yeah.
that's because they're not valid? No, I don't think
Oh,
that's because they're not valid. I think that's because we have problems with the way the criminal justice system treats domestic violence
it has
cases.
not changed in decades as far as women are
Yeah.
concerned.
Oh, add on top of that, okay, you're getting a divorce and you have file a criminal charge. Well, suddenly your criminal charge is going to be downplayed as if you're trying to get an advantage in your divorce case.
Oh, yes, definitely. I had my the second one. Um, I was out. My children were with my parents, so they were secure. I was well over 21, so I was okay to be in a bar drinking on a date. Left the place with the two bartenders. They closed. There's four of us, right? Three men. My ex pulled up in a car, left the car in the middle of the road, jumped out, went over and punched me right in the face and knocked me unconscious. Now, I figure I have three witnesses.
Sure.
So, of course, I file a criminal report and it went to grand jury. And all three witnesses showed up and testified. And they told me later, and even when I was testifying, the guy was really focusing on the fact that I was out in a bar and it was 2 in the morning. So it did not come out a true bill. And I thought, come on. So I went right to I just went blank, the attorney's office, the DA's office. And I said, I don't know if he paid you or if somebody he knows needed a favor, but I'm letting you know right now I'm going to buy a gun. And he said, oh, I don't think you should tell me that. I said, yeah, I think I should tell you that because you're not protecting me at
Yeah.
all. And
Well, that's a great point, and that's really not only in domestic violence area, but in all across the criminal justice system. If we hear things like that all the time now. If the government is not going to provide public safety, the
no,
public will demand it themselves. And what do you get? You get things like this. You get vigilante justice, and so the government needs to wake up. I mean, the real problem here is we're starting to see more and more data where one side of the political spectrum knew what they were doing would increase crime and they were okay with it,
it didn't.
and just to get their political agenda passed.
Yeah,
And that's that has to stop. I mean, we have to concentrate on public safety, not on a political agenda.
yeah. There's a terrible thing going on in this country right now, and I truly believe that women, gay people, and people of color are in grave danger right now because that seems to be who's being minimalized, looked at. And the laws that they're taking back, like the abortion law they overturned, gay marriage, a lot of places they overturned the right to do that. I mean, it's kind of scary. Like we're the
Well,
minority.
I would say it in a little bit different way, but all these policies that we're passing, I think we get to the same result though. All these policies where we're picking the criminal over the victim and we're saying the criminal is the real victim, you know, they're saying, well, we're doing it to address systemic racism. But if you look at it, and let's just say, okay, let's just say for the sake of argument, we don't have systemic racism, then who's getting hurt the most by these policies? The very racial groups
Yeah,
that they say they're trying to protect,
exactly.
because we by and large commit crime race on the same race.
Yeah.
That's why 50% of all murder victims in the United States are young black males, and generally their murderers or accused murderers are young black males. And for some reason in this criminal justice debate, we have made it where we're favoring the young black male murderer over the young black male victim. That we're seeing that across the spectrum in our urban areas, because we have a disproportionate amount of crime being committed against our black and brown communities. Well, that tells you by and large that crime is being committed by our black and brown communities as well. And so when we enact policies that disproportionately favor those groups, we're harming the very racial groups that we say we're trying to help.
Mhm. The only thing that's, like I said, changed it all for me that I've seen in 40 years is the information that for women, that there's places you can call and places you can go, and it's on TV, and you go in a ladies' room in a restaurant and there's a brochure. I mean, that's the only progress that I've seen, and that's not much. That's
It's
not.
not, because that tells you you really, really have to plan when you're planning your escape,
You.
because you have to know how long is this temporary option going to be available? Because if it's a shelter or halfway place, I mean, it may only be a temporary place. What are you going to do after that? So
Yeah,
you've really got to plan
yeah.
your escape now. And you have to do all that before you even think about going to the criminal justice system.
Now it's well, you know, it was lovely talking to you. So much we could go into here. And I think what I love about podcasts too is that the information gets out there and you kind of hear both sides. Like there's some things that you were a little bit on maybe a different page than I was, but then we went back and we're on the same page because down to it, it's about communication, talking, looking out for the needy, taking care of our women and children. And it's just not being done right now. So,
No, it's not, and we've got a lot to do still. And the governor, I mean, the mayor of New York City, who I would say is a progressive, he was on a podcast recently, and he said, you know, one of the foundations of society is public safety. And if we can't provide public safety, then we will not have a society. And I think I probably disagree with him on probably a whole bunch of stuff, but I
yeah,
agree with him on that. I mean, if we cannot provide public safety to our families, if we can't provide public safety to our elderly, to our minority communities in distress, and if we're going to set up policies where in our urban areas, businesses are closing because they can't withstand $25,000 a day of shoplifting, who's that going to hurt? It's going to hurt our underprivileged families. It's going to hurt our single parents of kids. It's going to hurt our elderly. And just because of a political agenda, I mean,
yeah.
where would we ever think that was okay?
And prices are going to go up if they're shoplifting and not getting any, punishment for it. Who's going to suffer? Because the department store, the drugstore, whatever, they're going to raise their prices to cover, the shoplifting. It makes common sense.
Well, they have to, but
Have
it
to.
can reach a point where they can't cover it. That's
And
the reason why they close.
yeah, that's what's happening. Well, listen, we're going to have to wrap this up. There's so much we could talk about, but the main thing I hope some of my female listeners got out of this was look at your relationship, see if there's some red flags, see if you've been denying reality to yourself, because I know women that do that, including myself at one time. And when you realize that you're in an abusive relationship, and God forbid if he's already hit you, because if they hit you once, they'll hit you again. Make the plan. Figure out what you're going to do before you leave. And that is so true.
Don't shoot for the whole banana on the very first time. You start a plan,
Just
put
start.
down your goals, and just start. Okay, so what's your first goal? Talk to somebody. and then
That's
start searching for your way out. And who's your support system going to be?
that's
And
right.
then how are you going to support yourself and your kids once you are away? And but also love yourself. This is just a terrible
Number
time that you're going to go through, but you're going to get through it. And
one.
then once you get through it, you will become better as a result, and you will find this better life. I mean,
Yes.
God did not intend for you to be a punching bag. God
No,
did not intend for you to be an abusive relationship. And
no.
so the goal, you love yourself, and
Yeah.
then everything else starts to kind of fit in piece by piece. And
Yeah.
then once you're gone, once you escape,
Mhm.
once you get your support system in place, then you can think about how do you go to law enforcement and
Yeah.
hold him accountable. Document,
So
document, document.
I have been communicating through your media assistant. Okay. And I don't have your email.
Mm.
Do you have a digital device on your phone for books like a Kindle, something
Oh,
like that?
yes, I do.
Well, if you send me your email, I'm going to send you a digital copy of my book because that Raised by Wolves, Trapped by Demons goes through every single thing we talked about,
Mhm.
including finding faith and a spiritual life at the end. I'm going from darkness through all the awful things into the light. So I'm going to send that to you. Maybe you and your wife will enjoy it.
All right. If
Thank
people
you.
want to know more information about us, they can go to our website, pbtx.com. We have a blog that highlights important stories in the criminal justice system, and we have our own podcast, which is called The Bell Post. You can
Oh,
find it at thebellpost.com, where we just look at criminal justice and bail reform type issues, and we try to educate law legislators and the public on
wonderful.
these matters.
Thank you so much. And uh, Elliot will send me all of that and I'll put it in the notes. Okay. Thank
Okay.
you again. We had a wonderful conversation. I love getting to know you and you have a wonderful life.
Thank you, ma'am. You too.